I'm Bess Littlefield with Reynolds Community College, and we want to welcome you to this evening's Equity Through Action panel discussion. Before we begin, I believe we have several elected officials here with us this evening. I'd like to ask them to stand and be recognized so we can thank them for their service to our community. Like each of you here this evening and the esteemed panel I'll introduce shortly, I have my own thoughts and opinions about Richmond, its history, and its future, about the greater call for equity from the many voices in this room. But even as we consider our different ideas on the way to move forward, there's one fact that's pretty indisputable. Without the seeds of investment, our growth as a community is stunted. When financial resources are scarce or withheld, opportunities that would flourish simply can't take root. Through the college's Educational Foundation, we're raising $12 million to join you in the incredible work you're already doing in the East End. The Kitchens at Reynolds at 2500 9 Mile Road is slated to open in the upcoming academic year. When it does, a new front door to our trade and academic degree programs, culinary, sustainable farming, and dozens more will open for the neighborhood. And with it, career pathways that pay wages a family can live on. Making our role possible tonight, we'd like to send a special thanks to Davenport & Company, who are sponsoring this evening's event. And they've also been the powerful engine behind the growth of our college foundation resources. I want to thank each of you for taking time to be here with us this evening and investing in this discussion. Let's let our dialogue on equity through action begin now. I'm going to give a very abbreviated version of our panelists' biographies because their accomplishments are much too numerous to list. And we really want to have some time for some of your questions. Leading our discussion is Melody Barnes. She is co-director of the University of Virginia's Democracy Initiative. She serves as chair of the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions and Opportunity Youth Forum. During President Obama's administration, Melody served as assistant to the president and director of White House Domestic Policy Council. Next to Melody is Mark Constantine. Mark is president and CEO of the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, which works to foster an equitable and healthy Richmond region through grant-making, research, impact investing, and conversations like this one. Mark has authored 2 books, Wit and Wisdom, Unleashing the Philanthropic Imagination, and Travelers on the Journey. Pastors talk about their lives and commitments. Another fact about Mark is that he and I were classmates at William & Mary together, and he was much smarter than me. Paula Pando, sitting next to Mark, is the 4th president of Reynolds. She is here on the eve of her official inauguration and installation as president of Reynolds Community College that's taking place tomorrow morning. As you'll hear, Paula has a profound commitment to educational opportunity and equity. The daughter of Chilean immigrants, Paula was the first in her family to earn a college degree. Prior to coming to Reynolds, Paula served as Senior Vice President for Student and Educational Services at Hudson County Community College in New Jersey. She recently completed the Aspen Presidential Fellowship for Community College Excellence. Multi-talented and multitasking truly describes our next panelist, Mr. Todd Waldo. And for those of you who live here, I know that he is a face that's well recognized. By profession, Todd is a director of technology, providing vision and leadership and strategy, planning, and implementation. He supports faculty and staff at VCU's School of Engineering and promotes computer science education as a supporter of Code RVA. Todd is also a talented musician. When he's not on stage in another part of the country, you might hear him right here in this neighborhood, as I did the other morning when I ran the 5K Hilltopper, where he lives here and is a passionate advocate for the community. He also serves as president of the board of the Robinson Theater Community Arts Center, so we thank him for letting us use this space tonight. With that, I'll turn it over to our panel. Thank you again for being
Well, thank you so much, Bess, and thank you all for being here this evening for the conversation and to help us start to celebrate the inauguration that will take place tomorrow. And just to give you a sense of what we'll do, we'll have a conversation up here for a bit, but as Bess said, we want to hear from you as well. So I know some of you have been writing down questions. If you feel the urge to have a question, raise your hand. We'll get a card and you can pass it to someone so that we can take some of your questions before we conclude. But before I begin asking the panel questions, I have a question for you all. Equity. It's talked about everywhere. It's been used in so many conversations. We've got candidates for office who are talking about equity. But how many of you all have been in a conversation about equity or thought about equity recently? Just raise your hand. Okay. Leave your hand, no, leave them up. Leave your hand up if you think that when you are talking about equity, you're having the same conversation as others who are talking about equity. Right, that's exactly right. So just to get started, give you a sense of what we mean when we talk about equity, we've been working from a definition that was crafted by an organization called Policy Link. Some of you may have heard of it. They're an Oakland-based organization, and they define equity as the just and fair inclusion in a society where all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. Just and fair inclusion in a society where all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So when we talk about equity tonight, that's what we're going to be referring to. And I want to turn to the panel. I'm going to start with Mark and ask you to think about this question. And you all think about this one too. You may want to ask questions about it when we get to that part of our conversation. But how has equity served as a compass for you in your work and also in your personal life?
Sure. Thank you. And congratulations.
Thank you.
We're so lucky you're here. I have the privilege of serving 15 remarkable women and men who are the trustees of the Richmond Memorial Health Foundation. 3 of them are in this room, and I'd like to recognize them. Joe Schilling, who actually works with Reynolds, J.R. Hipple, and the wonderful and remarkable Danny Abula. And of course, Dr. Cynthia Newville, who I have a chance every day to work with and more importantly to learn from. And for the foundation, its trustees, and the folks that we work with, I think our sense and understanding of equity is grounded very much in the fact that in our region, for folks living 2 miles apart, their life expectancy is 20 years different. And it's a life expectancy difference that is sadly often rooted in race and income and histories of segregation and isolation. And so for the trustees of the foundation and for me personally, our sort of commitment to equity reflects our shared belief that every human life matters and every human life should have the opportunity to reach its fullest potential. And I think for the trustees and for me and the folks, again, that we get to be in relationship with, it has been a 3-year journey for us of the recognition that our skin color and our age and so many factors can either make our lives a heck of a lot easier or a heck of a lot harder. And as a society of people who are in shared humanity with one another, we have an obligation and an honor and a purpose to do what Dr. Blackwell talks about, to truly be a place where there's justice and inclusion and people genuinely can prosper. So for me, I gain a lot of motivation from our trustees. I gain a lot of motivation from the extraordinary people in this city who are doing work every day. And it comes from this very fundamental part that we all matter. And we have to show our lives and invest in lives so that we all genuinely do matter.
Yeah. well said. Todd, I'm wondering, if you could add to that.
Yeah.
How do you think about that in the work that you do and the way that you walk your journey?
The word that I wrote on my piece of paper was heartbreak. It breaks my heart to see the quality of life of people. It's heartbreaking that a zip code matters as much as it does. The block you live on matters as much as it does. Where you're born matters as much as it does. It's heartbreaking. And so the fact that this is a justice issue means that it is inherently wrong. That should not be the way that it is. And for me to be in this building, in this place, knowing its history, some of you came to this building years ago, and there's life back here in the Robinson Theater. We're celebrating 10 years of service to this community. And for myself, the board, and the staff here, it's really important for us to create place and opportunity. That's right. Create place for folks to come in and find the things that they need. So maybe they need to learn how to express themselves better. We create space for that. Maybe they need to exercise. We create space for that. Maybe they want to just hang out and enjoy a really good band like Jay Tucker and the Crew.
For example.
We create space for that. Maybe we need to have a conversation that's hard and difficult. We create space for that. So for me, that heartbreak turns to action. And I use what I have. I've been doing board governance work for 25 years. I started right after I graduated from NC State. And I choose organizations whose missions really resonate with my own. And the mission of this place is all about being a great resource. I try to do that in my own personal life, and that's what this place embodies. And so that heartbreak had to turn to action, and I had to find what's in my own hands to do. And so for each of you, sometimes it's just a conversation. Sometimes that's enough. Your perspective in your family, in your community, in your household, in your workplace, sometimes that's just enough so that people can feel that heartbreak. We get desensitized because we watch the news, and it's full of people who look like me, and it shapes perceptions of what people think of people who look like me. That should bring heartbreak. When we see the difference across zip code, that should bring heartbreak. But that takes time, that takes effort on all of us to put ourselves in a place to let that happen.
Thank you. President Pando.
Well, these gentlemen are a hard act to follow, I'll tell you that. Well, I think coming from a family of immigrants, we really have a strong belief that a strong democracy depends on an educated and an enfranchised citizenry, where everyone's included. And when I think about my space in that, the community college is a uniquely American invention. And I think that people don't know that community colleges enroll half of all undergraduates in this country, half. But we enroll a disproportionately high number of people who are of low socioeconomic background. We enroll a disproportionately high number of students who are racial and ethnic minorities, non-traditional students. We're democracy's college. We were created so that everyone would have an opportunity to achieve a higher education, because our democracy actually depends on that. Not some people, but all of our citizens having that opportunity. And so when I think about the American Community College, I think I'm extraordinarily blessed to be working in the space of higher education where we can make the greatest impact.
Yeah.
We can, and we do, and it's part of our mission, it's part of our DNA. I think it's the most exciting sector in all of higher education because of the students we serve. And so I consider this job in this place an extraordinary privilege.
Yeah, I think maybe people sense, but not everyone understands, that community colleges touch more lives than other institutions of higher education. Something like 2/3 of all Americans will touch a community college in some way, whether it's a certification, it's to get your AA, it's to get your AA and go on and transfer, but it has tremendous impact on lives.
Yes.
You know, Mark, you and Todd touched on zip codes. And zip codes reveal a lot. What they don't necessarily reveal is all the talent that exists in the country. But they can be confining. But we know that there are so much that's good that's happening inside zip codes where there are also significant challenges. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the way that you and your organization show up in the lives of individuals who have great talent, but often are facing significant hurdles.
I would love that question. So last week, I had an opportunity to spend the day with this remarkable group of young artists and creative people in our community. The foundation supports something called Hearts, and it's this integration of health and equity in the arts. And it allowed me and this group of folks to spend time with folks at Thriving Cities and at Art 180 and throughout the region, these remarkably talented young people of color, young people whose limited resources often, and people who haven't had the privilege of going to William and Mary or other places. The ability of these folks to form relationships and to think expansively about democracy, to think expansively about what they want in the community where they live, to think about what it will take using the arts and organizing and deep relationships to make cities and places safer. It was one of the most hopeful days I have had in 3 years in Richmond. And these folks inspired me in a way I could not imagine. And it made me realize how often it is for foundation folks and other folks to lose sight of the talent and the sheer capacity, and as you said, to frame always in sort of deficit mentality, right? And the sort of the resilience and the determination and the ability to see possibilities and opportunities that I never could see with my really limited frames. That has given me a real deep sense of hopefulness about where we are now and where we can go. I'm sorry, y'all. It was an amazing day. So spend some time with young artists, and you'll be very hopeful about the world that we live in. So.
I think everybody could use a little hope sometimes,
No, it's true.
particularly right now. But anyway, but I want to push you
Go ahead.
On that a little bit more, because you talked about, you started to touch on this. What will that require of us in terms of the way that we change our thinking and our approach to our work?
Absolutely. So foundations are about as traditional as they get, right? And we are often very hierarchical and we reflect a certain period of time and way of making wealth and using wealth. And often we are not willing to show up and listen. Often we show up in place and we think we know what we want to see and we want to do. We often just don't show up with humility and an ability to actually be open-hearted and to sit and sometimes be appropriately critiqued for how we show up. Sometimes we want to have so much control over how we interact and relate with others that our need for control and our sort of patterns of being don't let other people challenge assumptions, don't let other people be different in new ways. And I think we're so afraid of what we don't know and who we don't know that we stick so often to the rigidity of rules and practices and behaviors and norms. And I think sometimes us in philanthropy, higher education, arts and cultural organizations need actually just to enter places with a deep sense both of humility and empathy and respect. Being open to be heartbroken, because I think that is important, but also to be hopeful, right? Because if you're only heartbroken, you can stay there. And you have to be hopeful and you have to be willing to change your own behaviors. How you invest resources, the words that you use. You've got to be willing to look at the micro of how we are as people if we want the macro to be different. So, sorry about that.
No.
Very
What do you
passionate about
apologize
this
for? No,
work.
no, no.
so.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for you, what I've been witnessing in your leadership is your profound ability to see people where they are, not where people want them to be, and create a space where people can come as they are and be seen and recognized and honored and flourish. And that's courageous leadership.
So, Todd, when Bess introduced you, she talked about the fact that if you live here, you probably know Todd. And I know you know what I'm going to say on a personal level. There are times I'm running to here or there over here, and all of a sudden I hear Mel, and I'm like, "There's Todd." Next time I'm there, "Hey Mel, there's Todd." So you are very much a part of the community. And using that as a backdrop for this question, I'm going back to Policy Link, and they have an equity manifesto as well as a definition. They say, embraces complexity as cause for collaboration, accepting that our fates are inextricable.
Yeah.
So thinking about that and thinking about place, I want you to talk some about complexity because the community is changing. And there are lots of people who are here, who've lived here for some time, and there are lots of people who are moving in. I have to give a shout out. My dad's here somewhere, and he's talked about coming to this theater and paying a dime to go to the movies here. Many years ago. I'm not going to out you that. And there's a lot of transformation that's taking place here. And I'm wondering, as that change takes place, that brings about complexity, and it brings about friction, and it brings about opportunity, and it brings about fear, all of those things that come together. If our fates are inextricable, if you could talk about, given your work here, how you believe we should approach that. What opportunity exists in the middle of that kind of complexity?
Yeah. So I grew up, my family's from Queens and Jersey, and I got to Richmond about 15 years ago. Moved into Churchill, actually on 33rd. So this was my first experience. And I knew nothing. Richmond was a place I went through, right? And on the highway, there's a big church at the edge of the highway. I didn't know that was Main Street Station. It just seemed, I didn't know what it was. It seemed odd to me. And I moved into this neighborhood, and I sit with friends like Percy Strickland. I sit with Ben Campbell. I sit with Don Coleman. And I just start walking around, and it reminded me of Linden. It reminded me of Newark. I said, why is that house boarded up? Why is that house boarded up? And I kept walking, and I got closer to Libby Park, and that's a beautiful house. This is really nice. Churchill is this amazing intersection of our deep, complicated, hard history. If you go to Libby Park and you look straight, you'll see the view that named the city. If you turn around, you see a monument to a Confederate soldier. You look across the river, you see the dock where the slaves disembarked. You used to be able to look to the right and see a nice statue of Connecticut, but Connecticut's gone. But there are these reminders of who we've been. And who we've been has shaped who we are. And we struggle trying to have value for all people, right? And we struggle trying to figure out, what does investment really look like? I love to go to the Roosevelt. I love to go to Alewife. I love to go to Union Market. I love to hang out in all those places, but I know those places only exist because someone decided we should make investment. The market's ready for it. Let's do it. Those investments don't happen on Oakwood. Those investments don't happen on 9 Mile Road. But we're trying to change that, aren't we? So when Reynolds College, when the market at 25th, when folks with resources and dollars say, when VCU says, we're going to be right over here, that makes a difference. Those investments aren't happening. Over here, we say, we want to respond to what the market's doing. We want to respond to opportunity. Over here, we say, there are folks in need. There are folks who don't have access to resources, and so we're going to have philanthropic dollars poured in. Those are very different kind of investments. And oftentimes, that philanthropic investment is connected to a devaluing of people. They don't have the capacity to learn. They don't have the capacity to be healthy. They don't have the capacity to be a good parent. They don't know what community is. They don't know how to live the way that we do up here. So that's in all of this. We talk about the neighborhood changing. We talk about folks coming in. We talk about folks being displaced. I use the word we of all Churchill. Not Churchill North, not historic, Churchill. And I use the word we because I feel a sense of responsibility to this entire neighborhood. All of it. George Mason, my kids. Miss Mary, who lives a couple blocks away, 31 and Q, that's my neighbor. It's we. Just like for the little stint when I lived near Bill Martin over South Broad, we. So without a collective view of ourselves, without leaning into that and realizing, yeah, we got some hard things to solve. That's the reality of our existence. This country has been flawed from the beginning. The whole setup was broken from the whole beginning of this thing. And we're dealing with the repercussions of that. So the honesty of where we are, but then saying together, what can we do? Can we have the hard conversation? Can we come to the table and bring what we have, invest what we have to try and make a difference? And say, yes, 9 Mile is worth that investment. Just like the investment is worth it over 25th and Broad. Those folks are just as valuable as the folks who live over here. Those folks are just as capable as the folks who live over here. And if we do that, we have a shot. We have a shot at turning this place around, and then we can be a model for what you can actually do. When you can create space for honest, hard, difficult conversations, change can take place. Northside's got to do it too. We're not the only neighborhood wrestling with this. So I've appreciated being in rooms like this where we can have hard conversations, to be in the community, thinking about how we can pool resources together, how we can value all people and pursue projects and pursue agendas and initiatives that really do value everyone, and start to try to lift up the entire community.
Your words made me think of one of my favorite James Baldwin, for they are all our children. We will profit for or pay for what they become. That's right. If we imagine that they are all our children, we are all neighbors.
Yeah.
And grappling with the complexity, not to make it milquetoast, not to downplay the challenge, but if we take that attitude, it's a different conversation.
That's right.
And so, Paula, in thinking about that conversation, I want to echo what Mark and Todd have said. One of the great pleasures I've had in recent months is getting to know you. I remember that first time we met, and your passion for this work and your commitment to this work and to doing challenging things. And as you've said, you are all in on equity. You haven't come to tinker around the edges or dabble. Time's a wasting. And given that, I'm curious what you consider to be the most pressing and important things and actions that need to take place.
Well, I think before action, we have to have a deep understanding of the students we serve. People show up to college, to church, to the store. They show up with their whole selves, So if I'm a person who's hungry, I haven't eaten in a couple of days, that hunger doesn't go away when you show up for your biology class. If I'm stricken with self-doubt, because perhaps people have told me I wouldn't amount to much, that doesn't disappear when you go register for a class. It simply doesn't. You carry that with you. If I'm concerned about making rent this month because there was an unexpected, costly emergency room visit, and I'm in class and I'm doing well, and I learned that I have to buy a $100 textbook, and I can't pass the class without a textbook, that worry about the rent and paying that emergency room bill and so forth, we show up with our entire selves. So that's the first part, is understanding that people show up with their full selves. as students at our college and anywhere else they go in life. And so where's the action piece? The folks in the room who have been working with me, alongside me for 7 or 8 months might call me impatient. A little bit, yeah. It's due when? But I'll say, there is the fierce urgency of today, because with every month, with every semester, with every academic year that we put off the actual work of organizing ourselves around the students we have, the ones we actually enroll, not the ones we'd imagined we'd have when we were in grad school, the ones we have. And we must organize ourselves around their success with the understanding that for some students, getting to our parking lot takes everything they've got. Everything they've got. And so what's our role? What is our role in that? That's the action piece for me. In higher ed, we take a long time. Right? My New Jersey friends here will know this as one of Paula's greatest hits. Where are you, New Jersey people? There you are. We know a problem exists. We know a problem exists. What do? First instinct, we're going to create a committee.
I'll talk about it.
That committee is going to talk about it for 6 months. After 6 months, the committee is going to make a recommendation, and then the college's governance council will review said recommendations, and if they approve the recommendations, we will then convene a task force who will, over the course of 5-6 months, operationalize the recommendations. And now a full year has passed.
Yeah.
And those problems we identified a year ago have not been fixed, they've not been addressed, and most of the time at the expense of our students. We can't operate that way.
Yeah.
We simply can't if we say we care. So my impatience, you'll have to forgive me. There is a fierce urgency of right now.
Preach. Well, first of all, if you have questions, you want a card, raise your hand and someone can pass them to you. But I've got another question for all of you. And as you think about what keeps you energized to do this work, again, thinking through this lens of equity as we have talked about it and the definition we're using tonight, I'm wondering if you can talk about, is there a moment, is there some event, was there some reflection, good or bad, that has served as a catalyst for you? Because this is personal. I mean, you started out with that, Mark. I mean, this is personal. So I'm wondering, maybe Mark, we'll start with you.
And I cry. Every trustee in this room will tell you that I cry, so I may cry now. I've actually had 3. I had the honor and privilege to spend many years doing work in Brazil and South Africa through several commissions and experiences looking at race relationships and HIV in those places. And I was on a plane ride home from Johannesburg, and I was tired, and I was sitting next to a white man from South Africa, and then I was actually sitting next to a South African who had lived in the townships for much of his life and had been in prison. So for that long journey across the ocean, I listened to his experience. In the middle of that plane ride, I started to cry and could not stop. And right now I have chills all over my body. Because in that micro moment, I saw a powerful reality of 2 men's lives. And I saw a man who was literally shaking when thinking about the trauma and the history that he had encountered. And I think about that moment every day of my life. And what was profoundly disturbing on that flight home is the flight attendant ignored him. She paid attention to me, and she paid attention to the young white man sitting next to me. And to be literally ignored after what he had endured and experienced in his life was simply stunning to me. And I came home and I was literally chronically depressed for about 2 months. Because if you have to sort of imagine those two different lives and how they got there and what it portends for their future and their children's future, it's just painful as hell. And that moment, more than any one singular moment, transformed my spirit. And yeah, it was deeply, deeply painful. And it was heartbreaking. It was simply heartbreaking. So I didn't mean to be a downer for the room on this glorious night, but I did want to, I think oftentimes if we do not allow equity to be deeply personal, if we stay locked in our heads and in spreadsheets or life expectancy rates, I don't think we at the heart level believe that indeed we are connected to everyone. I think it's really easy in the way our lives are constructed to imagine we really don't need someone else, or they're really not connected. But those micro moments can actually make you realize that indeed we are all profoundly connected.
Todd?
So I had this deep awareness of where I come from. I had to relearn my own history a little bit. And when I started to understand, my grandfather, Hugh Johnson was a sharecropper in this really small, poor town in South Carolina. And he never learned to read or write. When I met my grandfather, I had to read his mail to him. And I remember he had to sign some document and he put an X on it. When I started to understand Hugh's life and my mother's life, Helen, who's born into that, and so instead of playing with dolls or going to school, she's picking cotton and she's raising sugarcane. My great aunt Helen, she lived in New York. She was married to Uncle Dupree. Uncle Dupree worked in a shipyard, and so Aunt Helen would come down to South Carolina, and she inspired my mom, and so my mom makes her way to Queens. She graduates from Jamaica High, she gets into a nursing program. And then I'm born. We moved to Jersey, and she decided that this little brown boy is gonna go to college. She didn't know how to do that. No one in our family had done that. But she knew that was the path, and so she found the whitest neighborhood she could afford to move into, to get us out of Linden and into a good school. And from 5 years old, the words of racism were said to me. I know where I come from, all the way back to 400 years ago when the first person who looked like me was brought here. I know what it costs. I know what it costs for me to be in this room, to have a college degree, to attend more than one university. I know what it costs. My daughter, her middle name is Helen. She has a lawyer and an engineer as parents. 4 generations. And the best way that I can honor that journey, my mother's sacrifice, what Hugh had to suffer through, the best way that I can try and help and create a Richmond where my daughter, when she's an artist, graduated from VCU, and she's using her gift to solve problems, maybe she's solving some different problems. Maybe she says, Daddy and her friends figured that out. They got that. We're gonna solve this problem. I know where I come from and I know the cost. So the best thing that I can do is try to make a difference. I've been a victim of it. I've seen it. I know what it's like to visit your cousins in prison, to see your family living in the projects. I know what it's like to not have food and wonder the heat's gonna come on. I know what that's like. I've seen it. I've experienced it. So it's too real for me. And when I see those same experiences happening on my block, in my neighborhood, I have to do something about it. I have to. And so the things that I have, being a nerd and being a geek and do some stuff in technology, I'll use that. I can play some instruments, I'll use that. I can say some words, I will use that. Whatever I have, I will use that. Because I know the cost of me being in this place. And that's how I honor it.
Paula, before we go to questions, you.
I don't know that I can. But I will say this. I'm going to ask two people who will be very angry to stand. Their knees might buckle. My mother and my father, please stand. Please stand. I wanted them to stand and for you to see these beautiful people, because this idea that we live in a meritocracy is so flawed.
Yeah.
It's so flawed. When I look back at the neighborhood that I lived in as a little kid, it's all of the deficiency models checked off, right? Crime-ridden neighborhood, small apartments, a lot of kids were, doing drugs, selling drugs, going to jail, ... And so sometimes people will ask, well, clearly, Paula, you're a hard worker. You made something of yourself. You did. But here's where the meritocracy, yes, I worked hard. Absolutely. I know how hard I worked. But here's the piece that I had nothing to do with. It's called luck. The luck of having two parents who love each other, two parents who sacrificed everything for their children, everything, leaving their country, their language, everything, who worked really hard jobs because the public schools were terrible where we lived, to put us through private school. My mom let us go to Catholic school. She ain't Catholic. Let's talk about this. What are they teaching you there? But they did this for us, and I had nothing to do with that. I didn't earn that. I didn't work hard to have good parents. I just did. I just happened to have good parents who wanted us to have everything that they could afford. And that was the education. Education was number one, number two, number three, number four. I often joke that in our house, there were 4 high holy days. 4. And it wasn't Christmas, and it wasn't birthdays, and it wasn't Easter. It was report card marking period 1, marking period 2, 3, and 4. And my poor brother Frank always had the bad fortune of having his birthday follow directly marking period 1. It was never a happy birthday for Frank. But so this idea that we do it, that we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and that somehow I worked harder so I deserve more. The most important things that I have that have informed who I am as a human being reside completely outside of anything I ever did. It's my parents. And so, Todd, I share your thoughts. I know the cost. I know what they did. I had nothing to do with that. Only the good fortune and the beneficiary of that.
So I'd like to say something to you both. I know where I've been, and I know the privilege. And I think if we're going to really dive deep into equity conversations, we need to be able to name them.
Yeah. The hard thing, the hard reality of how the East End looks, it was on purpose. It was on purpose. It was on purpose that my grandfather was disconnected from resources. It's on purpose that Mosby is where it is. It's on purpose that Creighton and Fairfield, that's on purpose. It's on purpose the way the bus lines run. It's on purpose the way our schools are set up and how they're funded. Like this, that's frustrating, because you have people who don't value all people, and they have power, so they can set policy, right? So thank you for folks like Dr. Newville, who value all people and can lead us well as an elected official. But when you have people with power who don't value all people, right? That's where you get these unequal laws that reinforce the inequity, reinforce the injustice. So that purposefulness around it that's hard and frustrating. But that's a real part of it. That no, we didn't choose it, but things are structured that way, and that was done on purpose.
And I think it will take awareness of people of privilege to recognize that the rooms that we're able to sit in are so well designed for us, right? And that we need to be willing to change the rooms and the systems and the way we are if we are really actually going to be a different place and a different community.
Yeah.
I really appreciated what you said.
Thank you.
So I want to ask some of the questions from the audience, and these are really great questions. And what I'm going to do is two things. One, I'm going to ask like 3 at a time to give you all a chance to pick, from that 3 so we can move through them. And I'm going to maybe try to avoid Marianne and Bess's eyes and ask as many questions for as long, but until you all tell me that I need to cut off, because we want people to engage and have opportunity for more food. Okay, so with that, question number 1, I'm combining a couple of them. What practices, and Paula, this is directed to you, what practices are you implementing in the school, aligned with what we've been discussing? And also, how can business help Reynolds and this wonderful new president? So that's one question. Okay. Another one, and it's got a title, I love it, Gentrification as Heartbreak, and not the issue. I love the fact that it was given a title. And I think directly going to things that we've been talking about. It says, Churchill seems to become less and less black as white investment has been made in this area. I'm heartbroken that we are losing our place here. How do we not lose our place when others invest here? So that's a question. I know it's been on a lot of people's minds. And then another question, people have worked hard for the restoration of voting rights. On the other hand, many people just don't vote. How does this affect equity? So why don't we start with those? So we have one about gentrification, sense of displacement and investment, one about voting rights, and another one specifically about the practices that you're implementing, Paula, but also how you can be helped. What do you want from the business community here?
Am I starting?
Yes, you can.
All right. Okay. What are we doing? We're doing a lot of things, and we're moving quickly in the places that we can, and putting focus and attention on priorities for the future. Some very, very simple things. Don't take very much to do, but are so important. For example, we know that many of our students across the country are housing and food insecure. Many of our students have not had a meal, sometimes in a day or two, and a balanced meal in a month or two. So we've created food pantries on every single one of our campuses, every last one. So, and we're doing it in a way that destigmatizes that, life can get hard. Look at when the government shut down, you had workers going to food pantries, because for so many people it's paycheck to paycheck. So we're paying attention and we're listening and we're organizing ourselves again around the students we actually have. Those are short-term kinds of things. It's a Band-Aid. So we're partnering with wonderful organizations like Single Stop. Single Stop, think of it as the Amazon.com of services. So if we know students are coming to the food pantry often, they might actually be eligible for SNAP benefits. They might be eligible for a lot of benefits that are left on the table every single year. So we're making connections for students for services and benefits that make up the barriers to pursuing their education, because the tragedy in this country is that most students who leave college without a degree are academically eligible to continue. It has nothing to do with their grades. It's about life getting in the way. So we're paying attention to those non-academic barriers that derail too many students from what? Filling their potential, from reaching their potential. So we are paying attention to those factors and again, organizing our way to better support the students and to enhance their experience. For the business community, a friend of mine, do you know Eduardo Padron, the president of Miami-Dade College, legendary president, extraordinary man. He talks about, with the business community, he doesn't want to date them, he wants to marry them. And what he means by that is when we have business and industry serving in advisory capacity, letting us know what the real world looks like, what the skill set our graduates need to be successful, I want to marry you. Hire my students then. Hire my students. If we will take our curriculum and adjust and modify and build to what our business partners say are needed in the field, we'll do it. Now hire our students and hire them with at jobs that have family-sustaining wages tied to them.
Okay. Voting rights question or the gentrification question?
Both easy questions. I think for gentrification, I mean, any of us who lived in and around this neighborhood, I mean, you see it. The hard part of an amazing project like the market at 25th and rentals coming in, we can support it now. We've got enough people with the means, they can spend the money. And that's hard. Ms. Thompson, she has been dreaming of a grocery store for so long. And now we're at the place where we actually have it. There have been folks who have been hoping for this neighborhood to be different and better, but in a very particular way. It's good that we have the great things in this neighborhood, but when they're done in a way that doesn't make it inviting for all people, that's a problem. When it's built in a way because of price point or offering that automatically excludes some people, that could be a problem. We don't have a sense of design of our community where we're thinking about all people, right? So I've been in higher ed for about 18 years, and so I love your perspective on how you want to care for the student and surround the student and make sure that student has everything that they need. Do we have a design and model of our community where we understand the citizen at the center and all the things that they need, and are comprehensive in our design of our community and those resources? If we are, then we start to figure out that person might need to go to a grocery store. Let's solve that. Let's solve their food access problem. Oh, they need to get there. That's right. Let's solve their transportation problem. You know what? I wonder if they're healthy. Maybe they need to go to a place to get a health screening. Let's solve that. Maybe they have a child. They may want to go to a library. Let's solve that. You know what? They might want to be entertained. Let's create a theater. Let's get a place for them to be entertained. They might want to go and play. They need green space. You get what I'm saying? It's design, right? So the engineer in me says there should be a system here. There should be a design here that says, let's look at all the needs and create access points for everyone to get to those needs. We don't do that. We look for opportunity. We look for return on investment. Where can I spend some money? What's the cool place? What's the training place? Let me go there. And so when someone says, this neighborhood doesn't look like me anymore, it doesn't feel like me anymore, that's heartbreaking. And they don't feel any power to stop it. And it's that part of it to me is the worst outcome of gentrification. They don't feel empowered to stop it. So an idea is, those of you who care, be a good neighbor. One of the things that we did, I remember when it was a few years back. You guys remember when the assessments were way, way, way too high? You guys remember that? There was a process you can go through to appeal those assessments. And we walked block to block. Printed out the form. Mr. Johnson, is your assessment too high? Yep, I know. Fill out the form with me. Let's go to City Hall. Let's do it together. Mr. Johnson didn't do that. He knew how to do it. Mr. Johnson didn't have access to the internet. He couldn't print the form out. We did that as neighbors. And so sometimes just being a neighbor and helping someone navigate through Mr. Johnson, you got a will? You don't have a will. You need a will. What happens when you're gone? Who's going to own this property? There are very practical things we can do as neighbors to hold back someone saying, Ms. Jackson, do not sell your house. Ms. Jackson, hold on to your house. You need something fixed? We got you. We're going to talk to some contractors. We'll go ahead. We'll go fix that. We'll get your heat working again. We'll get your AC working again. There are things we can do as neighbors to help people stay in place. But I think it's that powerlessness, that it's like this wave coming at you, that to me is the hard part. But I think there's some things we can do as neighbors to push against that. You got the easy one.
Well, no, and there's some things we can do as citizens and investors as well.
Yeah.
Right? Because not all of us are neighbors in this spatial place, right?
Right.
But there's ways that you see Bon Secours and other foundations investing differently so that you can have people stay in place. There are public policies that actually can keep people in place. We're not powerless. We have tools and resources. So I think we have to make the decision that we're going to do it, right? And the other thing we have to recognize is not only can you have all those tools, there is a tremendous culture and history here. And as devastating as gentrification is, cultural displacement and powerlessness are equally devastating. Because a place forgets where they came from.
Yeah.
And they forget the mothers and fathers and grandmothers who made the place extraordinary. So we have to celebrate and affirm and honor history and culture as a resistance to gentrification. Because not only do you have powerlessness, you have amnesia. And once you have amnesia, you have nowhere to go back to.
Yeah.
Well, and I will just say this before we close, because as the person that works on democracy every day, I can't let the voting rights question go. There's a lot of friction in the system right now and a lot of noise. There are a lot of hurdles that prevent people from voting and a lot of reasons why I think people feel like their vote might be meaningless. Right. But I will also say this, having worked for a number of elected officials, that your vote is truly your voice. It is that thing that we can fight for, we can work on as neighbors to push against those who would prevent us from exercising our voice. But it is the way that you can elect an official, because in a constitutional republic, not a democracy, a constitutional republic, we consent to be governed, and we can send people, wonderful people, to council and elsewhere to represent us, but it is the way that we tell them what we need and what we want. And when they don't do what we need or what we want, we can say, then you can no longer represent us.
Yeah.
But if we don't exercise that, then those who don't want to create that just and fair society where all can prosper and all can meet their potential win.
That's right.
So these are questions of community and they are questions of power, but our vote in a constitutional republic is the way that we tell people what we need and what we want, and we give people the opportunity and the responsibility to represent us. So I think it is absolutely inherent to these issues of equity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
So there are other great questions, but I am now getting the hook. So please, 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 first of all, help me in thanking these wonderful, wonderful people. And then let's just do, though, another round of applause for the inauguration of this fantastic president and her wonderful family.